Dr. Furner, it's great to be back with you.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be back with you.
Hey, so just want to jump right in to how you understand moral injury and the operational paradigm that you use to describe it for yourself and to try to help explain it especially from a theological perspective. And I'm just going to start off by reading the parable of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15. And this is from the New King James Version. And then Jesus said, "A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me.' So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But then when he came to himself, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I may make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. That is the reading of God's word from Luke chapter 15.
Thanks,
So,
Pete.
Dr. Furner, thank you. How does moral injury work according to the parable of the prodigal son?
Okay, yeah, great question. So I use this parable as like a parallel handrail, so to speak, to kind of conceptualize how I was seeing moral injury or the biopsychosocial impairment that most people were associating with moral injury. So, I'm not a systematic theologian, and I leave, with our conversation today, I'll leave out a lot that's theologically embedded in that beautiful story that Jesus told. But I think there's a part of that parable that's, I think, is applicable for a conversation about moral injury. Not suggesting that parable can really speak to moral injury from a therapeutic standpoint or really be much use other than, I guess, how we could take a look at it, an angle. Like we said, the Rubik's Cube yesterday, like there's so many different angles to this moral injury conceptualization. So I, again, began my research by trying to answer the question, what is a deeply held moral belief, right? Because that's very common in the definitions. There's a violation of, or a perceived violation of something that a human being believes deeply. And when that violation happens, there is a biopsychosocial response to it. So most clinicians
when you say biosocial response, that sounds very technical.
Biologically, like what does it do to you as a human being, biologically, but also how does it impact you sociologically and psychologically? So how does your mind, your body, everything? So it's a really, I guess I'm using it in a way to the full anthropology. As you know, is working with veterans as a chaplain, PTSD type of situations, that you know that these soldiers are impacted holistically with this stuff. It's not just at work, it's not just at home, but it's everywhere. So that's why I'm using that. Yes. Thanks for clarifying.
So sorry to interject with that, but I wanted to make sure I understood you. So you're talking about just the way that violation impacts the whole human being.
That's
not
right.
just, I feel guilty, I have a guilty conscience, but I'm troubled, I can't sleep at night, and my relationships are suffering, and my cortisol levels are rising. Is that kind of...
That's right. I guess I can ask you a question. Is that authorized in this podcast? Can I ask you a question, or is it just...
okay. I didn't write a thesis on this, but...
yeah.
although I do have your thesis in front of me.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. So if I was to ask you, do you think that you could identify somebody that's morally injured? And if so, how would you determine that? What would make you think someone was morally injured?
Well, I think a moral injury that actually is impacting someone's life. Yeah, I think you can identify it. Yeah, it's they're troubled, and it's creating stress, and it's impacting their ability to function fully and completely, and it undermines flourishing. So yeah, I guess that's how I would identify it, through talking to someone about it. Yeah.
So the things that you would see in them, which we refer to, the clinical community refers to those as signs, and then the symptoms would be something someone reports, right? So they're saying things to you, and you're assessing that. So you see things in them, maybe you see them carrying out their duties in a way that would make you think, wow, this person is not flourishing or suffering from something, right? And then they say things like, I'm having nightmares, or I feel guilty, or whatever it might be. So those can be exhibited in many different ways. I guess that's why it's just a simple way to say, hey, holistically, they're impacted. And there's probably a lot more that you couldn't see as a chaplain, or a clinician may not be able to see. So if you go back again to Jonathan Shea, the 1970s, he's in rat groups. Now, I don't think they were the same kind of rat groups that we have now. They're like a Run DMC. I think what they're referring to as rapping is in talking about things. So it's group therapy. Although I love rap groups. I think rap groups are great too. I don't think he was listening to rap during that time. Maybe he was. I hate to judge you. But when he's sitting there and he's attempting to apply his clinical expertise in that setting, it's not working, right? He's seeing these symptoms of not flourishing, as you referred to it, right? These people are not flourishing. The assumption is they're not flourishing because of their performance of their duties in Vietnam. So he says there's something more here. As he's examining this, as they're telling him things, what they were telling him, I think, was that these soldiers were returning, and they felt like they were betrayed, right? So you'll see in Jonathan Shea's work, Achilles in Vietnam, these references to Greek mythology of these deep violations of leaders. So leadership malpractice was a big one, right? So they're thrust into this high stakes situation. They perform a duty they think is right, like good for God and country. Then they realize that the leadership has failed them, that they believe that the leadership had lied to them, or the cause wasn't for God and country, and they're confused. They come back, and there's protesters. There's the country's in conflict. And so they're suffering from this dissonance. I did this high stakes situation, such as killing. I thought it was the right thing to do, but now I wonder, I think I killed people for no reason, or they tricked me. And now they're discombobulated. It's one of the authors, I can't remember who it is. I'll get back to you with the author. It might be Peter Marin. He talks about like working with veterans, Vietnam veterans specifically. A lot of the good stuff was written in post-Vietnam era on this moral. They weren't calling it moral injury at the time, but a lot of stuff was written on this human participation in war and the results of that. So he said, Peter Marin, I think it was Peter Marin, said, it's like peeling back the corner of the universe and looking in, and you can't unsee the things that you saw in there. Right? There's something happened there that just transformed the person.
It's like you're living in a rented apartment. You peel back the carpet, and you
Yeah, that's
You're
good.
unsettled from that point
Yeah,
on. You see
yeah,
something grotesque.
yeah.
Wow. I would love that if you can find that quote, that exact quote, or who it said it was. I think you've shared that with me before, and that has been a vivid metaphor for me about what I think moral injury does. Is it peels back the veneer of the world that we live in and exposes us to a reality of a broken
Hmm.
universe that we live in. Whereas before, you might not have been aware to it. So you're describing that as an aspect to moral injury then.
Well, I think so. I mean, the way I was looking at it, I mean, you can look at it different ways. Again, I was seeking out understanding of what a deeply held moral belief is and how it can become injured. So the injury conversation is woven in a clinical language, right? You have to have an injury in order to heal, right? To fix. So this is improvement of quality of life, the medical model. We apply things and somebody gets better. That's the purpose of that's the purpose of a clinician. I think the conflict between the clerical and the clinical, some interest to me too, is like when a member of the clergy enters into the moral injury conversation, how do they enter in? Do they enter in primarily for the purpose of improvement of quality of life and clinically oriented type of actions, or are they coming in with something else, something more about God or something more specifically about religious practice, right? So I spent some time. I spent some time there. But if we can get back, I guess I should get us back to the parable. Why I found that to be helpful for myself, anyway. I don't know if the readers of my dissertation found it helpful. I do know that when I introduced into a theological work for the University of Aberdeen, I had to do the work in order explaining why I'm using this parable and how I'm using it, because I had one of the scholars there at the University of Aberdeen. I had discussed using this in Thomistic natural law thinking, which I'll get to later. And I think the response after I presented my stuff to him, he says, I think you can fight in that corner. It wasn't like it was good or would work, but it's not something that you couldn't try to do with it, right? So I was very careful how I'm using this parable, because there's a lot of scholars have done a lot of writing and work, and there's a lot of meaning in this parable. But for my work as a piece of practical theology, I thought I thought the reader could grasp sort of what I think service members are going through by examining the prodigal son's experience in the far country. So what I did is I saw some similarities between the far country, or what was the other NIV version, was distant land,
Distant
I
country.
think, distant
Mhm.
country. In the parable, it's not geographically specific, except for he's left his Jewish society, he's left his religion and God, and he's in the citizen. When he says hired himself out to a citizen of that country, the citizen's probably a worldly citizen, so um, would have been a Gentile. For a Jewish boy to go want to hire himself out to feed pigs is so Christ is, when he's telling this parable, he's really presenting like the worst case scenario for a kid who's really really lost his way. I mean, it's pretty intense if you really deep.
Abandoned his own identity.
That's right, identity, and I'll get back to that too, because that was a big part of it.
Mm.
So I saw this as the prodigal son left his father and entered that far country, time and space, with an assumption that he was good, right? That he was entitled to this, that he's entitled to leave his father's, and but he left with he really became an unworthy son. So worthy to unworthy. This, and talk about the biopsychosocial impairment. He was presenting these things as he returned to his father. So in that far country, something happened, right? So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. Let's examine the far country and what took place there. How could someone go as a worthy son and come out as an unworthy son? How could a soldier, a good soldier, committed his life to the defense of his nation, go in with a sense of worthiness and leave with a sense of unworthiness, or return with this self-condemnation and hatred for self? How's that happen for doing something that the country's asked them to do, and that most of the country, I'm going to say that it's noble service to a great nation? How's that happen? So if you see when he goes in there, he probably doesn't have an accurate conceptualization of himself. It's probably inaccurate when he enters the far country. He's probably come to believe that doing what his brother did was sufficient. That I worked for my father, I did things, I'm entitled to his inheritance. When he says it's the Greek there is the father is giving him part of himself. He liquidates. So there would have been like money exchange. The father's estate was wrapped up in agriculture, property. So he would have gotten those things and probably liquidated it, pennies on the dollar, right? And put it in his pocket and went into the far country. So when he did that, he gets in there and he realizes the reality of the world, right? Outside his family. Like he's left his family. Now he's in a situation, he's experiencing death and destruction through that famine. And when they mention famine there, they're not talking about people who were just hungry. We're talking about massive death and destruction all around him. So he's spent his inheritance. So he's, whatever identity he's gotten from his father, he's wasted, according to his brother. Now he's without anything. And now here comes a famine where he's experiencing death in a scale like he's never seen death like this, right? And then he has to survive, and he really just kind of sells himself to a non-Jew. And the Greek there is referring to when he says he went and hired himself out. He's begging. It's epoxy. He's glued himself. He's a bum. He's bumming off this man. And this man, some scholars suggest that this citizen had sent him to the pig fields, which pig fields were not close by. And they weren't beautiful countryside. It was rocky terrain that nobody did anything with, and pigs stink and they're loud. And of course, he probably just sent him over there to feed pigs to get rid of it because he's a bum. So he's lost his full identity is gone. He's given up his God, his father, his inheritance. He's feeding pigs. So he's feeding pigs for human consumption too. So it's like, so Christ is really stacking up this.
I just captured part of what you're saying, the pork aspect of
That's
something
right.
that was unholy. Okay, I missed that until
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now he's participating in this, what he would consider awfulness. So again, the hearers of this parable is told to the religious elite as well as the sinners. If you go back to the beginnings of Luke 17, you're going to find him saying the tax collectors and sinners have gathered around him, and the Pharisees are there, and they mutter, "This man eats with sinners." So those are the conditions from which he's telling the story. So you could imagine the sinners are going, "Whoa, okay, well that's kind of me too, right?" Like I kind of get this separation from God, and how sin can continue to separate you and put you in this position. And of course, you have the religious elite going, "See, told you, this guy's a sinner." And they're also saying, "Yeah, this son's horrible. Don't invite him back." I mean, there would have been an expectation for the father to discipline him. In fact, one scholar suggested that the father is the prodigal, that he's wasteful. He's not doing his responsibility. His son needs to be disciplined. A pot needs to be broken to represent the fractured relationship. He probably should be backhanded, slapped. It could even been a mock funeral. Because when he refers to this brother of yours, right, to remind him he's brother, because notice the elder brother says, "This son of yours." This brother of yours was dead and alive again. There should have been a mock funeral to represent, maybe there was, to represent this son gone, dead, out, no longer present in the family. Anyway, so he's in the swine fields feeding pigs and starving to death. And at some point he says, "Are there fireworks that are appearing behind me?"
I don't know what just happened. Some strange video effect since fireworks
That's
around
fantastic.
your head.
Yeah, that's fantastic. No, I love it. Does that mean I think you have a button there that you push?
I didn't push a button.
If I say something profound, you can let fireworks
If
explode
people
over
listening to this on the just the audio podcast, fireworks just exploded around Dr. Furner's head. I don't know why. Some internal feature from I'll ask the Riverside support people why. Sorry,
It's
go
fantastic.
ahead.
I would think if I was listening in now, I would want to watch now. So I think that's good.
What was it you said that when the fireworks went off around your head? What was it you said?
Yeah, I don't even know now, actually. So I don't remember. No, I think that he's sitting in there and he's sitting in the swine field feeding these pigs, and it occurs to him, wait a minute. And my father so he says he feeds his servants. Now, again, you got to unpackage all this, right? So what he's actually saying there, what Christ is communicating, is that the son believes his father is a good man because he provides food to people he's not required to provide it to. So these servants weren't slaves; they were day wagers, they were workers. So when the father says, "I'm going to go provide some additional benefits for these workers," that's what he says. This is a good dude. If he's going to feed them, he'll probably feed me too. He's not expecting what he receives from his father. He's just expecting him to probably give him a sandwich. Because why wouldn't? He's a good guy. But he's not. He doesn't have any idea the restoration that will take place when his father accepts him back and falls upon his neck. So anyway, that condition's there, right? Something has caused him. He says, I will go back to my father. And I said, I will say that I've sinned against him and before heaven. And that before heaven thing means that the Greek there is communicating like this stack of sins. And the stack of sins is so high, they go into heaven. Like people in heaven are tripping over that. There's so much. So I've sinned against heaven and before you. So in front of you, I've sinned. I've sinned to heaven. God no longer welcomes me. I have nothing, and I'm actually expecting you as a good guy to maybe give me a little something to eat so I don't die. So he says, I will return to my father, and I will say to my father, I've sinned against you before heaven. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like a hired servant. There's also some arguments out there that when he says that, he doesn't say, make me like a slave. Because a slave didn't have a lot of rights and ability to work himself back up. The theory would be that make me like a servant so I can prove to you. I can work in your fields all day, and I can follow all your rules, and one day I'll be back up with my brother. That maybe I'm not down now. Maybe I do have a chance. Obviously, that's foolish thinking on the son's part. He's missing the father altogether. But again, back to why I use this to understand the far country. I consider the far country experience is that you enter into this time and space, and you reflect on the things that you've done, the things that are in front of you, the things that you're experiencing, and then it causes some kind of change. So again, the psychological community, I think, refers to this as active evaluation and agent appraisal. So I'm going to do something. How I define my identity is by examining and evaluating the things that I do. So, for example, if you consider yourself a good husband, it means that you have observed your behavior, you've reflected on it, and you said, I'm a good husband because I'm attentive to my wife, that I support her and I love her and I don't cheat on her and I bring her flowers, or whatever it is that you have defined for yourself a good husband. Or vice versa, if you're bad, you consider yourself a bad husband. So he went in there thinking I'm worthy, and then I'm no longer worthy. I think some things happened that he experienced that caused him to have some dissonance with his, not only his behavior, but this change and fluctuation in identity.
You know, when it talks about him being hungry too, so hungry he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. That's symptoms, right? That's holistic dysfunction where I'm presenting symptoms of I'm desperate. Is that how you interpret that also? That aspect of his hunger, and you correlate that to someone who's suffering moral injury is, man, I'm hungry for rest, for healing, for restoration, for filling. I'm hungry to be full and whole again.
Yeah, I think they were called, I think they were pods that they would feed the pigs that had protein in them. So the pods, these were, in fact, he even says in there, was it the pods, curation pods, CAROB, pods, that he's saying, I don't even want the protein seed in the pod. I'll chew on the pod, which had a really, really tough texture. So again, Christ is setting the conditions to put this prodigal son in the worst possible condition that he can be in. There's not much more to add here to paint the picture for Jewish people to go, this dude is down and out. His intent is to set the conditions by saying, this is what sin looks like. This is what separation from God looks like. You're experiencing, you've been given an opportunity to experience separation from God. Now,
Mm.
I'm quick to remind the listener, viewer, and in my work that I'm not suggesting that war fighting. I'm not even contributing to that conversation, but I'm not suggesting war fighting is sinful in and of itself. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a combat situation like the far country presents things to those who are in it, things about themselves and the world, and the nature of sin and all that are present in those places that they're not otherwise present. So that none of that far country was present for the son throughout his developmental years. They were only present in that opportunity in the far country. And then he reflects on those. So that time and space, I think we spend some time there. And maybe we can get on to the next one, start the next one with that specifically what's taking place in there. But it's this awareness of something he wasn't aware of before.
David Wood, his book, What Have We Done? A quote from his book says, a moral injury is a trauma as real as a flesh wound. In its most simple and profound sense, moral injury is a jagged disconnect from our understanding of who we are and what we and others ought to do and ought not to do.
Yes, that's that's good. So I do suggest that as awful as that far country experience was for that young man, it was the best experience of his life. But it's also the experience that could have killed him. I mean, he could have capitulated in the far country. He didn't have to. He says, I will arise and return. I mean, the effort to do that, right? Not only the physical effort to do it when you're starving to death and that long journey back with no resources. How about in terms of dignity? He's got to walk back to his father through Jewish communities and admit that he has done these things. And that's powerful stuff.
A long walk of shame, public repentance.
Yes.
Yeah. Sir, I know it's 7:15, or 13, whatever it is for you.
Yes.
I know you got to go. Oh, man, I really, let's continue to dive into the far country and how that correlates to moral injury. Has anyone else made the same kinds of correlations with that passage of scripture?
No,
to your knowledge?
Not that I come across. It could be,
okay.
But
well, it's a very tangible way to lay hold of this somewhat nebulous concept. Thank you for this. Any closing comments you want to make before we finish out this call?
No, Pete. No, thanks for the opportunity. I tell you what, let's. And I'll send this to you. I think maybe could we start with like a video next time? I mean, even the audio of the video is fine too, so that listeners can also get something from this. But this is a statement made by an actual veteran that I think parallels well with the Prodigal Son. And I'd love to watch, listen to that, and then compare and contrast these two young men.
Okay, absolutely, be great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I hope you have a great day, sir. Thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Pete. Appreciate the opportunity.